And then
Okay,
Carrie,
so-
one more thing, where is Carrie?
I'm going to pick up the
Oh,
packet.
God, I was
Copy of
like,
that
she was
jam.
just there a second ago. If you can make me co-host, Carrie, and then I can share my screen, so as Jim's going through these, I'll
Yes.
show them for folks on the
And
chat.
the packets are on the copier jam, so I'm just jamming the copy.
No worries.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah. If you could share the screen. Yep.
Yep, I will, Jim.
You go, sir.
All right, here we go, gang.
Okay, so there you see A3 mileage reimbursement, just switching it from state to IRS reimbursement rate per mile. I believe they're, roughly the same, but the IRS is better known. Now, the next point, and this is going to tie into several changes, is an A6, which had been net assets reserve. Now this ties in with, we're going to be discussing and try to make some decisions on a possible different approach to investment of certain of the funds of the organization. So we have a change to restricted net assets reserve fund, which, if you'll all kind of probably remember, we as a policy, we used to have a reserve of 200,000. We upped it to 270,000 about a year or so ago. And that's intended to cover, like, as it says, 4 to 6 months of normal operating expenses of the organization. So ensuring that we have that there to ensure our survivability. And so this is just redefining the net assets reserve to the restricted net assets reserve fund. And again, that's just specifically, we have the total funds of the organization. For instance, right now, we just received a whole lot of dues, which we receive up front in the year, and then spend those monies through the year. So the 270,000 restricted net asset reserve fund right now is only about half of our total reserve. But through the course of the year, that'll, the unrestricted reserves will decrease. But so this is currently, 270,000 as per board decision in this fund. Does that make sense to people? Okay. And we'll be getting, you have some follow-ons on that. A7, authorization of signatures. Here just a couple of minor changes to recognize the fact that the board does give, here in the past it said the board gives specific employees certain authorization to sign on behalf of the association. We wanted to make it clear that that instead of the board making a decision as to what Sandra can sign and what Phil can sign and what Kara can sign, effectively we can give the executive director authority and then specify here that the executive director has the authority to delegate that signing authority to other VSBA employees. Just a lot simpler than the board trying to micromanage who can sign what. Okay, A8, monthly financial statements. This is just adding that what it had said is that it said the status of budget shall be reported quarterly. In reality, we're really looking at the budget against the actual financial statements, what we're doing. So just that's a sort of a clarification that, we're providing not just the budget on a quarterly basis, but providing the actual results, the financial statements. Okay, the audit, A9. This is, the way we've always done things is we essentially we do a full audit every other year, and the in-between years, we do what is called a review. And actually, the finance committee is kind of getting into that a little bit. You may see in the minutes of the last finance committee meeting, we asked Carrie to help provide us with actual examples of what each looks like. Because right now, we had been kind of going on the assumption that and elsewhere we were calling it an audit every year, but if we're specifying that we do an audit every other year and a review every other year, then we want to make sure we're accurately reflecting the actual way the operation or the organization operates. So in there, we ended up having to say that we don't provide an audited financial statement at each annual meeting, because we'll be doing a statements that have just been reviewed at every other annual meeting. So just sort of a technicality. A10, that's a little bit more significant of an issue, and one that some school districts have seen in recent times as well. Back in the old days, what we did was, in order to protect the organization's assets from wrongdoing by employees, etc., what most people had done was used something called a surety bond. In reality, nowadays there are so many different ways you can have your funds at risk, that what we've done is redefine that. It's a surety bond was a part of our insurance coverage, but what we're doing is we're broadening this out to full insurance coverage, and ensuring that on an annual basis a review is done of what insurance coverage we have. That includes, and we did one of those reviews this year, that includes coverage against, there is a bond against the potential wrongdoing by one of our people. But in addition, we wanted to ensure that we're covering situations. We could have third parties trying to steal our money. We could have fraud trying to, fraudsters trying to take away our money, etc. So we've basically, turned this into every year we're going to do a full review, and that included this year we're looking at cyber attack insurance and cyber risk insurance. So the idea between this shift in insurance coverage is basically to make sure that we look at our full range of protections and make sure they're adequate in consideration of the type of business we do. That's really meant to modernize this and make sure that we're considering things, because nowadays you do have to. Some of our school districts, including mine, know that cyber insurance is a really important one as well. My district had an attempt at ransom for data, and I'm sure others have, and we have to protect things like that. A11 fiscal year, that's a simple change that we had made our move to changing our fiscal year, and this is it took us a couple of years to make that transition. Now that we've done it, this defines our fiscal year as we operate now. And in addition, instead of just saying that dues are payable within 60 days of invoice date, we thought it would be a lot clearer to just give a specific date. So dues are now, we have our fiscal year end June 30th, and then dues are payable by September 1st. Okay, the next one, A12, this is the first part of something, as I said, we're going to discuss a little bit the possible different approach to investment of funds. This ties into our creating the restricted net asset reserve fund earlier. And the thought is, in the past, we had what shows up below, A13, which was deposit and investment of association funds. Historically, all the funds that we had in the organization were invested effectively in bank deposit CDs. Over time, and certainly in recent years, that has really not generated much in the way of income. It's been safe, but has generated very little in the way of income. Since we as an organization have a restricted net asset reserve fund that is intended to be a consistent amount of funds that are there for emergencies, those funds aren't expected to be tapped on a very frequent basis. So investing those, so those really need to be considered as long-term funds of the organization. So what we're proposing as a finance committee is that we move to investing those in a very safe, rational, but in a way that should actually, beat inflation, hopefully. Maybe not nowadays, but beat inflation over the long run. So that is specifically for that restricted net asset reserve fund, which today, as I said, is 270,000. And the idea is that for those funds, our other funds would continue to have the same approach as in the past for investment. But for these funds, that we put together a procedure. This is really the policy, and later we'll talk about the procedure. The policy is that those can be invested in a manner consistent with VSBA investment procedures. The finance committee really, takes on the new job of investments, but the honest truth is, when we get into it, it's basically, a couple of different indexes in a very low cost and, approach to investing, like a money market, a fixed income, and an equity index that would be invested. The board would remain in control of, basically we set up the investment procedures that will say that the finance committee will recommend to the board an asset allocation structure, and the board, is in charge of approving any asset allocation, and the finance committee will track that, report to the board on a periodic basis on the results. If the finance committee thinks there should be any change to the way those funds are allocated for investment, it has to come to the board for approval in advance of doing that. So the board stays, in control and gets information on a regular basis as to, how those funds are doing. But the finance committee will oversee, will keep a closer tab on it than the board is expected to. Also, when we get into the procedures, you'll see that the finance committee doesn't touch any money. The finance committee just essentially gives directions. If there are reasons to move money or change anything, then that really is that's done by VSBA staff, and it requires a full approval structure. It's intended to be a pretty safe, to have good controls over that activity.
Jim, it looks like we got a couple of questions that pop up during this part. Is it okay?
Great. Okay. Yep. Please, Lisa.
All right. Yeah. Let me go to Lisa first.
So, Jim, my question is, what is the essence of the word restricted? Does it mean the fund will never drop below 270? Or what was the reasoning to add the word restricted to that? What are the restrictions?
Well, the restrictions are they're without essentially approval. They're not intended to be used in the day-to-day operations of the organization. It's really, this is the emergency fund. So we want to make sure that, if it is going to be tapped, then we have to go through an approval process to tap those funds. But, in a case where if there were something significant that happened with the VSBA where there was a significant expenditure, then we want to have those funds available, but they're restricted from just not being used as an everyday, not being used as your regular bank account that can be tapped without asking anybody.
We go to Dave Sharp next.
Thank you. Jim, is this the only investment fund that the VSBA has? There's no pension or healthcare funds that are also invested or held in reserve? Is that true?
That's true. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
Any other questions? This one topic seems to be fairly popular. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, Jim, I guess I am just wondering about I can understand you wanting to make a little bit more interest on it than if it were invested FDIC like Part B funds are. But that, I guess, makes me a little bit nervous. I would not be opposed to saying that the restricted funds also should be in FDIC. We don't, people don't pay dues so that we can use their money to earn interest on it, just sit on it. So that's just a personal opinion I have about the ways it should maybe be invested. And I don't know if other people feel that same way, should we look at this policy?
I think you're probably not alone in having a little bit of concern with going this direction. I've done this with a couple of other organizations, over the years. And the real intent here is, basically when we keep it just in CDs and FDIC, interest-bearing accounts, FDIC covered interest-bearing accounts, the 270,000 produces next to no income. Just in, if you look over longer periods of time, that it's really not hard with a relatively low level of risk to do significantly better. And while, we aren't, from my view on this is these funds should actually be able to produce, significantly more than that. And what that could do down the road is actually to take some of the pressure off any increases in dues for districts. As if this, it really, I'm also the VSBA's rep on the Vermont Pension Investment Commission. And, that's not exactly the Wild West investing or anything like that. But, this approach for these funds is like the core funds for VPIC, where, essentially all those pension funds are being invested in a series of indexes, which over time, just, history tells us that there will be some more volatility, but over time, it does dramatically better than just staying with, extremely short bank sort of instruments. And, the risk level, is not, we're talking about things like, putting some of the money in S&P 500 indexes and bond indexes and money market funds. And there is a higher level of risk. I view risk in a couple of different ways. There's a higher chance that you could have a decline in those funds over, some period of time. At the same time, though, I tend to, I'm a Warren Buffett sort of guy, and I go with him where he ends up saying a big part of the risk is if you do just invest in the money market instruments at all, you're taking a lot of risk in that that you're losing to inflation over time, and your upside is extremely limited. It's the old, portfolios like this, they're the long-term returns are just dramatically different than just in bank investment or bank deposit accounts. So my thought is, the whole thought I have with this is, to me is that this can take some of the pressure off of dues going forward.
Thanks, Jim.
Without much risk.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank
I'm gonna go to in the room right now. I've got Kim Gleason.
Thank you. And I think that at the end, Jim was hitting on there. I was just gonna point out the different types of risk. And I think we most often think of risk as the market risk, the risk of decline. But the inflation risk that Jim mentioned at the end would potentially have the effect of eroding what we're required by, I think it's policy, right? I believe it's our finance policy to have 4 to 6 months of operating expenses retained in the restricted reserves. So that is our rainy day and we can get through 4 to 6 months if everything were to blow up on us. And so if we aren't having that keep pace, then we are running a different type of risk there. And I think that Jim articulated that well at the end. I just wanted to point it out because we do have some requirements about what we keep there. And that might answer the restricted question too. It's restricted because we have other funds there that may be used to cover something we hadn't anticipated if approved by the board in the budget. But this restricted reserves is really intended for those rainy day, I guess, if you will, that could cover us for 4 to 6 months without having to close shop or let people go. We can protect ourselves, which is, I think, a prudent approach in our responsibilities as a board.
Thank you, Kim. Any other questions or comments from the room? Online, Martine, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I was just wondering if there had been any conversation about, specifically where we're investing the money, for example, staying away from fossil fuels. I know that complicates things, but I'm just wondering if you all had talked about that and where you ended up.
We honestly didn't, Kim and I are both on the Vermont Pension Investment Commission, and that's a big issue there as well. And, people suggesting that we make changes like that. Honestly, with our funds, we are proposing to put it in like the S&P 500, which does include, an S&P 500 index, which would include fossil fuels. It would include some other things that people might find objectionable, but it's, and we could find alternative indexes, but, there's a great benefit to having that, while I totally understand the concern with, investing in some of those industries, I think, we're doing the most sort of neutral, simple thing we can do by doing something like S&P 500. It's the most liquid, and it's, if you look at things like, the S&P 500 actually has a, even though energy companies have been doing better lately, it's become a much smaller part of the whole index and all. So it's, we're not supporting some of those things in a huge way, but we get real advantages by being in the most liquid instruments that have the lowest cost of investment.
Thanks, Jim.
Gaston, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. The only concern or question that I have is, I'm a big proponent of, the market will go up and down and you're looking for the long term. So in the short term, if your investments take a downturn, like, we're seeing now, what if it goes below the 270,000 that you have set out? Does that now mean, based on policy that Kim brought up, that we now need to add more to that to get it up to 270, even though, the market fluctuations are in play? I don't know if that makes sense or not.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think that, the way we've dealt with it in the past, like I said, we had a 200,000 reserve fund, and then we upped it to 270 because we have a bigger, a bigger total expenditures per year. And, I don't see us, this is that 200 and the 270, that was actually decided by the board, the full VSBA board. And I think that, this isn't really intended to be that much of a trigger sort of thing. So So you're really looking at, you know, it's 270 now. It fell a little bit below. I don't think it requires any immediate action or anything like that. It's the board can review it on a periodic basis. And again, part of the hope here is right now, you know, when we have it in CDs and stuff, we have 270 there, and next year it's worth 271. And the thought is that, you know, over 5 years, you know, we will probably at some point have the need to up the reserve fund again. But the hope is that actually it can grow itself to the, you know, it can grow on its own, and it'll have more ups and downs. But, you know, just history tells us that over, you know, over a longer period of time, this is a more rational approach. So that would be the hope. You know, this isn't riskless, but it's also not Wild West here, you know.
Thanks, Jim.
Bart.
Bart, go ahead.
My question was along the same lines as Gaston's. I was just curious as to how much consideration you've given to, you know, looking ahead to maybe getting ahead of myself right now, but with a 50 to 60% equity investment allocation, you know, it's like you said, it's not riskless, and I appreciate, you know, actually trying to have a real rate of return that outpaces inflation, so our spending power doesn't decrease. But I guess how much of a shock can we absorb without dipping below sort of the minimum reserve outlined policies?
And that's, you know, one of the reasons to have a bit more diversified of a portfolio is to be able to ride that out. And then, you know, kind of bring up VPIC, just, you know, Kim and I on it. And it's been a rough beginning of the, you know, after last year where, you know, returns were close to 20. You know, this year it's looking pretty poor. But at the same time, with a diversified portfolio, it's declined a heck of a lot less than the equity markets have overall with the diversified portfolio. But it's down, you know. And so, you know, our last report was like, you know, showing, and you know, it's a rough couple of days nowadays too, seeing, you know, huge declines. But you know, through the first, you know, beginning of even with those big numbers down, you know, with the pension funds, we were talking about like a 7.4% decline, which, you know, isn't pretty, but at the same time, it's that also follows a year where we had almost 25% increases. So it's more volatility, and we're in extremely volatile markets right now. But I think it's, you know, again, that if these were funds that we thought that we had a good chance of needing in the near term, then it would argue for more conservative than that. You know, we're talking that 60-40, you know, or, you know, territory. We could argue for even more conservative, but at the same time, these being very long-term funds that aren't expected to be tapped frequently, and if they are, probably not the whole amount. This is just kind of where we came out as maybe a rational risk-reward blend. Not to say that we've got it nailed or anything like that. You know, happy to hear different suggestions.
Thanks, Jim. I got another question or comment from the room. Carrie.
Hi, Jim. It's more of a historical reference, and that is, we went from 200,000 to 270,000 just a couple of years ago, wasn't it, Kim? And it wasn't because we had more expense. It was because we had more money to put into savings, basically. So the 200,000 and the 270,000 were both within the range. We just put more in because we had more additional funds available.
Okay,
So,
great.
And I
Thanks.
think,
And that was, so we were probably, you know, trending more down towards the 4 months and then bringing it back up to the 6 months, sort of, I guess. But
that's
yeah.
why we have a variance, yeah.
And I think that was the other thing I was going to point out, that we've offered that range, and I believe when Nicole and I worked on it, it was Carrie quite a bit ago, we targeted 5 months and started there, but we did the range on purpose. And I think as we've changed the amount we've sort of locked in there, we stayed within the range, but moved it to reflect our budget changes as well. And done so when we've had the account balance to do it.
Exactly.
So I think we wouldn't be forced into a need to move, because the 270 isn't in policy. The 4 to 6 months is in policy, and it would be, I think we review that we review that as a finance committee every budget cycle.
Yeah, so gang, I am a little bit conscious of the time. I think this has been a very valuable discussion. I think one of the things that I will add here is that, you know, as I read the policy, this is not a set it and forget it sort of thing. This is a recommendation of a new way to go ahead with, I think, some pretty serious oversight built in to the process. So it's not like I think we're likely to lose control here. Rather it be from a finance committee standpoint or a board standpoint. I still think that there's significant opportunity for either of those bodies to make sure that things are working out the way that we expect it to. So I think the oversight piece is baked in. I just want to make sure that folks see that and read that as well too in the proposed change. Jim, can I get you to, let's maybe move on from here?
Yep. The rest is much quicker anyway, but that was the big topic, and we've got more to discuss on that later. But after that, we're really the next group of the next page, which would be the NFB National Convention, Federal Relations Network, and the monthly Board of Directors meeting. Essentially, you know, we'd said before that, you know, we're changing from state to IRS, and that plays through on each of these. These are all just about expense reimbursement. And part of it is, you know, what it used to say was that you'd be reimbursed for the lowest of the actual cost of commercial transportation or mileage. And the thought was, okay, well, so if it were cheaper to get mileage, you know, going to Texas, would you just get the mileage and not get paid for your flight? So, you know, we figured, okay, let's clarify that. So that was the intent there. And the Board of Directors meetings, the same thing, just going to the IRS. We decided to, you know, simplify, make it, you know, consistent and simpler. On the meals, where there used to be, you know, potential to get reimbursed or meals provided, we just said we're providing meals. So we'll just, you know, forget about the reimbursement, because that you know, really isn't the way we operate, and it just confuses things. And the third one, because we all have cell phones and cell phone plans now, it seems a little ridiculous to be talking about getting phone expenses reimbursed nowadays. So we dropped that. Then the next item is A17, electronic transfers. And this ties in a bit to the investments again, because, you know, we're talking about, you know, we researched whether we could use some of the people we currently use for other, you know, for like 401k type, 403b type plans for people. And it turns out that, you know, in reality, you're talking about, if we do this investment, then probably it's the, you know, the Vanguard, Fidelity, Charles Schwab sort of firms, because they're by far the least expensive. You'll find, you know, very inexpensive to do an investment program like this. But one of the benefits is we'll have funds in there, and if we needed to bring them over to meet, you know, any expenditures of the organization, if we had that need, then you could actually do that through electronic transfers, and that makes sense. So we wanted to make sure, though, the controls are there, and, you know, since we have the ability to electronically transfer funds, and the controls are that, you know, essentially, one, they can only be set up so they're transferring accounts from that investment account to the VSBA operating bank account. So those are the only directions they go, between VSBA accounts, not outside the organization. And also, if you're going to make a transfer like that, the executive director and at least one other employee will be the people who are able to affect those transactions. So it's really just meant to be trying to put a little bit of control over the ability to electronically transfer, but to allow that to happen in case we needed to use it. So those are all the financial ones. The rest is, well, the one other thing, if you go down document retention, we're saying that we added in investment reports a little bit lower than that. It will be retained permanently.
Dave, get your hand up, go ahead.
Thank you. So not to try to extend this too much, but we don't do direct deposit for our employees.
Yes,
That's
we do.
not an option. Huh?
But it goes through a payroll company.
So isn't that transferring funds electronically? Just to be picky about it, but
The payroll company transfers it.
how do we get them the money?
That's true. Yes, they automatically, that's true.
That's probably an ACH transaction, automated, yeah, clearinghouse transaction, yeah. Good point. So that, it's a good point. So maybe we should be, we're trying to do the, here we're saying financial account to financial account. Maybe we need to add in here that we can, electronic transfers for payroll.
Yeah, and credit card payments. But we put, that's all in our warrants. I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but our warrant that you sign, that the treasurer signs annually lists the places that we pay and how we pay them.
That's right. Yep.
I
And
don't
so
know
I
if
should have
that-
picked up on that before,
Would
It's a
that
good
be
point,
the
Dave.
Probably you could just put in this phrase, according to the warrants issued by the treasurer or something to that effect.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would be fine. I think, like in our school district as well, we try to restrict electronic payments to the minimum just because it can create some additional risk. And I think we'll continue to do that with, I think it makes sense to continue that with the VSBA. So maybe with the exception of transfers from one VSBA financial account to another VSBA financial account, or
Yes,
or to providers, specified in
the annual warrant list.
the annual warrant list.
Perfect.
And I think we'll keep those minimum.
We do keep them as minimal as possible. Exactly.
Yeah, Lisa?
I have a question going back to A7, authorization of signatures, and it just seems a little muddy to me. And I'm curious why it doesn't just say shall grant authority to the executive director who may delegate such authority to other VSBA employees. It seems like as the board, we're granting
can answer that.
authority. Excuse me?
I can answer that because the bank requires the board to make a motion for signers on accounts. The bank requires it.
Okay, so the bank's making a motion to grant the executive director. And if
Oh,
you're
no.
giving that person authority to have other VSBA employees be signers, obviously the board hasn't made a motion for those individuals. So
No,
what
the
would the
board-
difference be?
Whenever we have signers change, the board has to make a motion to authorize this person, this
Right.
person, this person to sign, to be signers. And the minutes from that board meeting have to go to the bank before they can change the signers on the
Yeah.
account.
That's essentially, they
Is that-
require a board
is
board
A7
resolution.
That's just talking about the bank? Because
No.
in what you're talking about doesn't make sense with the sentence that you've added. Because it says the executive director may delegate such authority granted to the executive director to other VSBA employees. So that doesn't hold water that a motion was made and sent to the bank. I
I think
see what,
this goes well beyond just the bank, because this would also be, if the board said that the executive director authorizes the board authorizes the executive director to sign a contract for certain services, then the intent here is to say the executive director could say that, okay, Carrie, sign on my behalf. So this
Okay,
goes beyond just the bank, but
I-
I get Carrie's point that, the bank on account does require a board resolution for who are the authorized signatories. Yeah.
Yes, and I understand that. I'm a signatory on an account for an organization as well. But
Yep.
it seems conflict because it says the board of directors shall grant authorities and then it says the executive director may delegate. So if the first sentence is referring to, let's see, financial institutions, then it seems like that it should say that. Otherwise, it basically seems like in that everyone's going or has the possibility or of having the ability to sign.
Okay, yeah. This is probably my wording and my thought was the first one was the board. I didn't want the board to have to make every decision of, every person who can sign everything. But at the same time, so, the first sentence, my thought was that the board could just authorize, all sorts of documents, authorize the executive director to do it, but then we're saying that the executive director has the authority to delegate. So that was my read of it.
Yeah, can I, just to clarify, Lisa, I'm not certain that I understand your concern here.
Because the first sentence says the board of directors shall grant authority to specific employees to sign certain documents, right? On behalf of the association. If that's only financial documents, then I think it should say that. But then it says the executive director may delegate such authority granted to other VSBA employees, essentially to sign documents. So it's like two different entities are giving authority to sign documents.
Yep.
Why wouldn't we just grant the authority to the executive director who could then delegate to the authority to VSBA employees?
Yeah, that was the intent of what this language was going to accomplish. Maybe I think it does actually do that, but if the board director.
I think she wants to strike through the
Yeah,
first sentence.
Lisa, just out of curiosity, I'm gonna go to Dave Sharp, but if you've got some recommended language that you would like to suggest be substituted here, that would be awesome. Dave, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking, Lisa's point is well taken, I think, in the sense that A7 is in direct conflict with what the banks are requiring, right? So the executive director can't just delegate somebody to sign bank drafts. It has to go before the board. So you could just add a sentence that said, subject to a resolution passed by the board or something to that effect. I think is it that big of a problem for the board to, or what problem are we trying to solve here? Is it a big problem to bring a resolution to the board that says, Carrie's going to sign this and Sue's going to sign that, and
Well,
someone
Depends on
else
the
is going to
contract.
sign something else?
I don't think
It's
it's
not
certainly
just
not
the
a
bank.
problem for authorized signatories on a bank account. But, from, on a day-to-day basis, I think that the organization has to execute documents and, on behalf of the organization. And I just, to me, the first sentence read as if the board was going to have to decide who signed each of the, each document. The board had to designate who could sign which documents. And that just seemed like kind of ridiculously micromanaged.
All right, let me go to Mark Schauber, and then I do want to return to Lisa. Mark, go ahead.
So I think the fact that we have to pass a motion to change the bank signers is sort of separate from A7. A7 covers everything else. And I don't see them being in contradiction to each other personally. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mark. Lisa, have you had a chance to come up with some proposed
So
language?
I would have just had it say, shall grant authority to the executive director who may delegate such authority to other VSBA employees. I mean, it sounds like that's basically what you want to say.
I think that would work fine. So Board of Directors shall grant authority to sign documents on behalf of the association to the executive director, who may delegate such authority to other VSBA employees.
Yeah,
Okay. Any other comments, questions, concerns related to the financial policies? In summary, I've heard, board members generally in broad acceptance of all of these proposed changes, with a slight amendment to this one, A7, and I'm gonna turn to Sue here in a second, but I think she was writing, and I don't know, Sue, if you captured the.
We're recorded, so I'll get the language from the recording.
Well, because I think I want to make sure that, so if I'm gonna look for a motion, I want to make sure that folks know what we're moving for. So.
Okay, what, you want me to state what I think we agreed on there?
Hang on, because I think Sue might have actually had it all written down.
Okay,
See if you agree with me, Jim. So, we'd be eliminating the all yellow sentence that begins with the executive director. That's getting stricken. And so it will read from the beginning. For the conduct of the business of the VSBA, the board of directors shall grant authority to the executive director to sign certain documents on behalf of the association, who may delegate such authority to other VSBA employees.
sounds good.
Is that what you have, Jim?
No, but it works.
Or is
Okay.
it, yeah.
Lisa, you good with that? Take that as a yes.
yes,
Okay. And then the one other change that I saw too was referencing electronic transfers. And there.
Okay, the VSBA shall not transfer money electronically with the exception of transfers from one VSBA financial account to another VSBA financial account, or transactions approved as a part of the annual warrant approved by the treasurer.
Okay, the quick language that I captured, Jim, I don't know if this makes it any simpler. It says, or to providers specified in the annual warrant list.
That works. Yep.
Okay. Do any board members have any issues with those two proposed changes? Colleen, go ahead.
What if you have a new vendor?
They have to be approved by the treasurer.
But then it won't be on the annual list, it'll be new.
If we get a new one, we can update the list more than annually.
Okay.
Yeah. Right, Carrie, we've done that.
The warrant list,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, generally what we do is that we get the approval of it from the treasurer, unless it's gonna be consistently, throughout the year.
Would it make sense just to strike the word annual?
Yes.
out of the warrant list? Okay.
Good change.
Want somebody to have to wait a year to get.
Lisa, I see your hand up. Is that from before, or you still have a comment or question?
Nope.
And it just went down.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I just have what I think maybe you guys caught, A10 on the table of content. Still needs surety bond with collision insurance coverage.
Yeah, we're gonna adjust the table of contents when we get all the,
Got it.
yeah.
We'll catch the
that'll all
title
change.
change.
There's
Got it.
several title sheets.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, any other, if folks aren't keen on what I'm about to do here, is I was interested in just getting a motion and an approval for the financial policies before we move into the other ones. I was gonna handle this in two chunks.
So moved.
So I'll second.
Man, you guys you're with me. I'm glad to see that you're with me. I believe that the motion that Tara actually made was to approve the policies as presented and amended at this meeting.
Correct.
And it was seconded by, was that Bart?
No, it was Mark.
Mark.
Yep.
All right.
Yes.
All of those
Mark
in
S.
favor, hang on, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that I can see hands. All those in favor, please raise your hands. That looks to be unanimous. Okay, thank you, board. All right, so that took a little bit longer than I thought it would. We've still got the other collection of policies. If the folks in the room here are not dying for dinner, I'm going to try to push forward and see if we can get through these changes before we break for dinner, if that's okay with everyone. All right. So let me go back to the screen share, and we're going to scroll then to the B section. And then let me pull up my notes. Okay. So in the B section, the first, in addition to all of the sort of the global changes that we talked about before, VSBA being replaced for association and some pronoun changes, I believe the first substantial change happens in B4. And here we've inserted language referencing the proposed legislative committee. You'll find that it's fully defined in policy B4, which we're going to get to a little bit later. But this additional language amends essentially the hierarchy for the VSBA in developing public policy decisions. At the top of that hierarchy are resolutions that are approved by membership. Just after that are positions determined by the full board. Next would be the new proposal, and that is positions determined by the legislative committee, including language on what to do when the legislative committee is unable to convene a quorum. And then the new language here related to advisory positions would have the final approval fall with the legislative committee rather than with the full board as we handle that currently. And I see a hand up from David Chandler, so I will pause there for David.
Oh, you're muted.
That was an accident. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, the accident was the hand up or the accident was the muted?
The accident was hand up.
Okay. If folks are, so I know that there's probably some folks that would like to speak to the legislative committee piece of this. I think it might be best if we can get through all of the changes, because then we'll also go through D4, which describes the committee in detail a little bit more. So if folks are willing to just hold those comments, I'm going to go through the rest of these. So in my list, the next substantive change comes in section C, which is legal assistance and support. And here we've modified the process so that requests go just to the ED, and we've removed the option that those requests would also go to the president. So trying to streamline things a little bit. Next change is in section D, which is board operations. Here. In D1, we're now specifically referencing the state statute that is pertinent to nonprofit board operations. We've also added language requiring specific action by board members when a conflict of interest arises. And here we also reference the specific state statute that pertains to nonprofit boards and conflicts of interest. Now, the next big change is D4. Which establishes the legislative committee. So board members might recall that during previous discussions, the policy committee recommended that this new legislative committee be initially established via policy rather than bylaws, and that was on purpose. That was so that we might have more flexibility to revise this committee's duties or operations during what we were calling sort of the initial adoption phase. I'm just going to read this proposed change because really all of the detail that we need to know and talk about are right in this language. And so the legislative committee consists of the executive committee plus one member from each region, not otherwise represented by a member of the executive committee, the VSBA president, shall serve as chair and shall not be considered a regional representative. The immediate past president of the executive committee shall not be considered a regional representative. The regional representatives will select which of them will serve on the legislative committee. If a region is unable to decide, the VSBA president shall have the authority to appoint a representative. The legislative committee shall have the responsibility for determining VSBA policy or advocacy positions where no collusion or previous action of the board exists, and timeframes for a decision preclude a meeting of the full VSBA board. When it comes to meetings, membership of the legislative committee shall be determined annually before the start of the Vermont legislative session. Meetings will be called as necessary by either the executive director or the president of the VSBA. The quorum shall consist of 8 members, which shall include at least 2 members of the executive committee and representatives from at least 6 regions. Substitution of members shall not be permitted if a regional member is unable to attend a meeting. Voting, each member of the legislative committee shall have 1 vote in determining policy or advocacy positions. Simple majority vote shall be required to approve any committee action. The VSBA president shall serve as the tie-breaking vote. VSBA policy or advocacy positions will be determined by simple majority votes of the legislative committee. I think that last sentence is actually a little bit redundant now that I read that through. In the absence of a quorum, the executive committee shall have the authority to develop an advisory opinion in accordance with VSBA policy B4. So we, as you read through policy, sometimes we jump forward and then sometimes we jump back a little bit. All right. I know folks might have some comments on that, but I'm just going to also go through the remaining changes, and that is in section E. Association meeting and meeting participation. We've tried to simplify the language regarding remote participation. So if there's a tech failure, we'll revert to paper balloting for the in-person members. We've also shortened the timeline from 30 days to 10 days for those members participating or wanting to participate remotely for notification. Rather than requiring specific internet speeds, we've changed that to say that it just must be sufficient to support streaming audio and video. And if remote voting fails, we will attempt to secure those votes via a different means. And then finally, down here at the bottom, we have removed the previous restrictions that were associated with remote participation. So that, in a nutshell, are the proposed changes for the remainder of the policies. Do board members have any questions or comments about these sets of changes? Dave Sharp, go ahead.
I'm curious why you're not permitting alternative regional members in the event that one regional member cannot attend a legislative committee meeting. Why you're not allowing an alternate?
Yeah, so Dave, I believe, and other policy committee members, please correct me if I get this inaccurate, but the feeling is that one of the responsibilities for serving on the legislative committee is to stay up to date on legislative items. And we felt that that homework being done was important to the success of the legislative committee. And if for some reason or another, if that regional rep wasn't able to attend or make a meeting, then the expectation would be that the backup would need to have been equally involved in doing their homework and staying up to date on things. And I think folks just felt that knowing how busy the legislative session can be and how much homework these folks will likely need to do, to put that burden on both regional reps wasn't I don't want to say fair, but maybe not necessary. And so that's the reason why the policy committee was recommending that we do not substitute folks if one region rep is unable to attend. If there are other committee members that want to chime in, if I got it wrong, or if there's other flavor you want to add, please let me know. Kim, we got a hand up in the room.
So I think mine's the exact opposite. If all are in attendance, do we constitute a majority of the board? Does the legislative committee constitute a majority of the board and by its own action is acting as the board? Is that a problem? I think it would be a problem on a public board, so I'm just wondering if all are in
It is,
attendance.
yeah, sorry, it is the same form. So I guess,
So if you have full attendance, you are
there is,
making an
you're-
action
yeah,
of the
you're
full
saying there
board
is no difference then at that point between a legislative committee and the full
and a full
board.
board. So I'm wondering, thank you.
Floor.
So, and that reflects on before, right, you know that you guys were trying to make the change that then, instead of putting the agenda item for the board to make a decision, it would be the legislative committee to make a decision. And I guess that makes me really worried that it's gonna be confusing for an executive director, for example, who is our executive director gonna listen to? I feel like my mind would be going both ways, like, well, I pay attention to just the legislative committee.
Floor, can you just speak up? It's hard to hear you.
Sorry, I don't know where the mic, oh, there.
It's in the
I
owl.
need to speak to the owl. Can you hear me better now? Or no? Mark, yes. So I'm worried
Yes,
that
thank you.
the executive director is gonna have a hard time deciding who she is gonna listen to. Because now we've removed, I don't know, I think we're making obsolete the full board as a whole in making any decisions in what we care the most. I think that a lot of us come here because we want to make sure that we're contributing to the conversation in the legislature of, making sure that the changes there are positive, not just for our district, but to all our kids, right? So it would be, you would have, who do you pay attention to in anything? You have a forum of the committee all the time. And if I do the comment in the other part of the policy, I don't want to see alternates. It's really hard to manage alternates. It's really hard to, have different opinions come at different times. It creates it basically creates a different board within the board, right? Right now it's nimble, and I know that we can change a little bit our process as an executive committee. But so I'm not saying that there's no changes that are needed, but I am really worried about creating. I don't think we're a board big enough or a state big enough to have a legislative committee.
Nope.
And I know that I'm in the executive committee, so I really didn't want to speak up, but I didn't see a lot of people speaking up, but just the logistics to me.
Sure. So let me go, I got two people online and then I'll come to the two people in the room. So Don Collins, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Neil. Neil, I want to thank the members of the policy committee for working through this whole revision, but most.
Oh, Don, we lost you.
You muted.
No.
No,
Oh,
I
his
think we lost
internet.
it.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe no.
Well, maybe, Mark can come back.
It's frozen.
Oh, Don, you are back. So we only caught your introduction phrase there. You said thank you and then we lost you after that.
Okay, so I'm thanking the group because I believe that B4, even though it may be a little controversial, maybe a little pushback, I think is a good step. And meeting our overarching mission, we want to be the lead organization, but we want our members, our directors here, the people that come to these monthly meetings, to be involved. And I think this will take and get more people involved.
No, we lost it.
Just lost your audio, Don.
And the video is still there.
Must be cold up by the Canadian border.
It must be raining.
Don, we lost your audio.
Oh, yeah.
If he's still talking.
All right, let me do this. I'm gonna go to Mark, and then if Don's audio returns, we'll go back to him. Mark, go ahead.
All right, so I just want to respond to what Floor said. The legislative committee is only going to be making decisions when time is of the essence and the whole board can't gather. Any other time, the same times that Sue and the staff bring legislative issues to the board now will continue. So I don't think we're taking anything away from the board as a whole. And in fact, by allowing more board members to participate in those few times when time is of the essence, I think we've got greater participation, which is sort of what I think Don was getting to before he got cut off there.
Thanks, Mark. Don, is your audio back yet?
Okay, Comcast says my connection is unstable, but what Mark is saying is true. You know, I enjoyed our time at Randolph. I really think we hash things out. We want to be a lead organization. We want to involve our membership. And I think the more opportunities we can give the people who come to the monthly meetings to participate in key decision, the stronger we are going to be. And therefore, I'm hoping we can make a unanimous yes on this and say, look, let's try it. If it doesn't work, then we can come back and revisit it. I think not to pass this is just going to continue. Well, we really don't want to expand member participation. And when I say member, I mean regional director participation.
Thanks, Don. I'm going to go to Tara and then Kim, and then we'll go back online. Tara?
I guess my question was just, who is on the legislative committee right now? Is it just the executive committee or is there other members?
So this notion of a legislative committee doesn't exist currently.
Okay.
The way that we handle it right now, so according to the existing bylaws and policy, is that if the executive director needs immediate input, she'll come to the executive committee. By our bylaws, the executive committee can issue an advisory opinion to the executive director. That advisory opinion needs to come back to the full board at the next regularly scheduled board meeting for approval. You may not remember, we've done that a few times. So Sue has come to the executive committee, we've opined on something, given her guidance. But that decision has always come back to the full board for an approval at the subsequent meeting. So that's how we handle it now. And this idea of a legislative committee, this is a new idea.
And who's the executive committee now? I know two, but I don't remember the other two.
Yep, so the executive committee, as far as bodies go, president, vice president, treasurer, I was gonna say finance director, treasurer, and secretary. Including also an immediate past president. if
There's no
one.
secretary, member at large.
Oh, sorry,
Member at large, two at large.
man, I should really pause there. President, vice president, treasurer, and two at large.
There you go.
And they are right now.
And so they are right now, so president, vice president, Colleen, Jim Salzgiver, so Colleen's an at-large member, Jim Salzgiver, and Adrian Raymond is the other at-large member. And they are all elected, right, by this group, by the
That much I
VSBA
remember.
board.
I just remember who was in what position.
And we'll be, and just a little foreshadowing here, we'll be doing those elections again in November.
Okay, I knew it was coming up.
Yeah. So I know I've got a few more hands online, but I want to go to Kim and then we'll make sure we get the folks online too.
I don't know that I had anything else except to question whether or not it works. If full membership of the legislative committee takes a vote, it is a majority of the full board. Is it, so it's a position of the full board. It never comes back before the full board.
The way that this is structured now, right, yes, the way that we've got it set is if the legislative committee takes a position, it does not come back to the full board. That's how it's worded
Yeah.
currently.
I'm just saying if you were at 2 and 10, but that it did, it sounds like it's not technically a conflict then, if it never comes back for the full board. Right? If it comes back before the full board and the full legislative committee voted on it, and that is a majority of the board by the numbers of bodies on the legislative committee, then you would have already taken a vote as a board. I can't keep track of the count to know if that's what's happening. I think usually if you've got one person from every region on it and you're not voting, you've got a majority of the board, yeah?
Yeah, it's just that the vote may not, the vote may not be a majority of a full board majority vote, right?
So then does it come back to the full board? as a board position? No.
Not according to the way
By
that
this
the
time, okay.
policy is written.
I'm
right
just
now.
pointing out an observation, not,
Yeah.
not really taking any position whatsoever on it. I just was curious about that observation.
Okay. Let me go online next and I'll get to the folks in the room. Lisa, why don't you go ahead?
Could you just confirm for me then what the actual number of bodies would be on the legislative committee? And then that would be in addition, whatever that number is, it would be plus the 6 of the executive committee, is that correct?
No, no. So it would be, let me just work out the numbers here, right? So we've got 11 regions. Right? The president, and if there is one, the immediate past president do not represent regions. But the remaining executive committee members can and do represent regions. So help me out here. We've got. We have.
So you're saying there would be 15 then?
13, a potential for a maximum of 13.
Wait, isn't there, so there's a vice president, a treasurer, and 2 members at large? Isn't that,
But,
Something happened.
our
to
owl
our
just,
sound.
you guys still hear us? Okay.
We lost Lisa, the owl hooted.
Yeah. So the legislative committee would consist of the executive committee, right? Except that the president and the immediate past president don't represent regions. So then you would potentially have, if you're gonna have one member from each of the 11 regions, you would have 11 members in total there. And then the past president and the immediate past president for a maximum total of 13. That number could be lower, right? If there was no immediate past president. So you could have a maximum of 12 or a maximum of 13, depending on whether or not the organization has an immediate past president.
Neil? I just want to say that the reason that the president and past president don't represent regions is because they don't on our board either.
Right. So that's just mirroring the current setup for the VSBA board as a whole. The president, while I come from the Windsor region, I am not considered a Windsor area rep. We have Nancy and Amy in that role currently.
So I do have something else when you get to me.
Yep. So
so
I'm
can
gonna
I
go
just
down.
ask a clarifying question? So if there is a person on the executive committee, they're going to be the regional representative to the legislative committee. It's not going to be someone else. Is that the way it's going to move?
As it is currently written, that would be correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Let me go to Don.
Neil,
Yep.
were you calling on me?
Yes, I was. You had your hand up.
Okay, I'm just going to pass it this time and enjoy the conversation.
All right, Mark Schauber, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that the reason that the policy committee chose not to take the position that they take back to the whole board is because in essence, once a decision is made, whether it's by the executive committee or this legislative committee, we can't then ask Sue to go back to the legislature and say, oops, this isn't what we wanted to do. We really want something else. The effect of our advocacy would come into question if we started doing that. So we felt, myself personally, very strongly that once a decision is made, we can't go back and change it. Otherwise, we undermine our own advocacy work.
Mark, Dan, you're next.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Neil. I want to speak in support of this. I feel that this would be a wonderful way to try to get the entire state involved with these things. I think we have seen, and I think I have felt as if I am a little corner of the state that really has had no representation on the executive committee. And I can assure everyone that especially Mark, but myself as well, we pay close attention to what's happening in the legislature. And I think Don made a good point earlier too, that this is not cast in stone. I would love to see us try it. I would like to see us determine how well it works and whether it needs further finessing, or do we like the way it's been set up by the policy committee? So I speak in favor of going forward with this.
Thanks, Dan. Mark, is your hand up from before, or you have another point? Okay. Colleen.
I am on the executive committee, and I was on it for the first time this past year, and I was completely surprised at how active the executive committee ended up being in what was supposed to be a slow legislative session. And there were things that were coming up on a regular basis that Sue had us prepare for a conversation. We were able to come together, have conversations in a very timely manner, meeting weekly, I believe, that we were doing. So I value the conversations. I think they're really important. And I think all of us on the executive committee really do try to pay attention to the entire state. I know all of us do. So, we can make that promise and we can have that assurance, but I can understand where others may feel like they're left out of the conversation. I get that. But I guess my biggest concern is the timeliness of providing good information or allowing for Sue to have some thoughtful discussion. And I'm looking at one of the clauses related to voting, and it says that if there's in the absence, this is where I think it's problematic. In the absence of a quorum, the executive committee shall have the authority to develop an advisory opinion in accordance with VSBA policy. So in the absence of a quorum, to me, that says that, okay, you have a meeting that gets pulled together, there's no quorum, and then it's really, I think there's confusion there about what's driving some kind of advisory position. So I think the timing for being able to give feedback will be a challenge in this construct. I have one other piece I just want to say. I'm concerned about this concept that the legislative committee will increase involvement. And I just look at our monthly meetings and I do not see full involvement. Those of us who show up, it's the same faces every month, but I don't see the entire state fully on board. And I get that my positions may not be popular, but these are my concerns. That I think the timeliness for giving Sue good feedback, whatever construct that needs to be in place.
Thanks, Colleen. Any other comments in the room?
I just have a clarifying question. Is that okay? I'm just wondering, so is the legislative committee just going to be active in the absence of a resolution? Because that's sort of what got us in conflict. So if the resolutions committee, the legislative committee is going to be the body active when we have a resolution that is not clear and it's absent, then that is different than if if the legislative committee now becomes the executive committee, right? Like, that's where I'm confused. We before had guidance that if there was no resolution, we go back to the full board. So if all we're doing is going to the legislative committee when there's no resolution, then that's different. And then I'm okay with that, right? Like, you need to gather quickly and it's just gonna be where there's no guidance, the executive committee continues to function as an executive committee, and it doesn't make Sue have two hats in order to like keep up with everything. So I'm just, it's not clear to me.
Yep, so I think if we go back to policy B4. This states here that the legislative committee would act for a position about which there is no resolution nor a previous VSBA board position. Does that answer the
Yeah, so
question?
So what is that one committee that, you know, like the one that, you know, sort of our feet on the fire last year was one instance, and I'm trying to remember what it was right now. So, or are you, when you see this, Sue, and I guess it's a clarifying question for you, when I'm interested in your opinion too, and I know that you're sort of reference supposed to function for whatever policies you set. Is there anything here that worries you, or when you read this, is you're just gonna assemble this committee when there is a question, when there's an absence of a resolution?
Yeah, well, I think it says that's when the committee gets assembled. So my reading of this is that if it's something that we do have a resolution on, and I'm just looking for some, you know, maybe some factual information from school board members, that I could just ask the executive committee about that because there's already a resolution on it. But if it's something that we don't have a resolution on and the board hasn't talked about, then I would need to assemble the legislative committee.
I just don't want either, you know, like, I don't want false expectations on the legislative committee either, that, you know, suddenly they're meeting once a week, and that's not the case. It's just when we don't have, when we should have proper resolutions in order for you to be quick
Right.
and respond. Okay, those were my questions.
Okay. Any other questions, comments from the room before I go back to Zoom? Kim?
Did the immediate past president vote?
No.
I know you break the tie. That might not be clear.
My recollection is that wasn't necessarily clear. I think they do not represent the region, but I do believe that they would have a vote, as they would in the executive committee.
Yeah, so, okay. So if everybody were present, you'd have 12 and you'd be the tie-breaking vote if it were close, for
Correct.
instance. So you've got 12, potentially 12 votes, and then, but you only have to meet it. Okay. I just wanted to clarify because that wasn't obvious.
Yep.
I was trying to figure it out.
Okay. Let me go to Dave Sharp online.
Thank you, Neil. So probably everybody realizes this, but I think it's worth restating that when the legislative session starts in January, you know, there's lots of bills, hundreds of bills, and it's hard to know even which ones are going to be taken up. And things move rather slowly, lots of testimony in committee, and you know, that's just the way it is. But in the end, you get to the end of April and into May, things are flying around in a hurry. And some bill that we've been involved in and working on, maybe half of it's taken out of the bills killed, and at the so-called important half or third is stuck into the appropriations bill. And you know, and things happen fast. And so I have to agree with Don and Mark that this is a good effort, and it may or may not work and be helpful, but I think it's worth trying. And and being more aware and involved as a group in the end game, so to speak, than we're able to be currently.
Thank you, Dave. Gonna go to Adrian next.
Executive committee, so I do feel like I've been involved in most of the major questions. I don't anticipate doing that for, even if I'm elected, doing it for much longer. What the purpose of the executive committee will be going forward, other than a backup group for when the legislative committee doesn't have a quorum. I mean, this is an honest question. I really am unsure of what the role is going forward.
I'm not sure that I've got a good answer for you at this point in time. I think it's one of those things that, that based on what this body decides.
Can other people hear Neil?
Moving forward. What's that?
She can't hear you.
Oh,
No? Can everybody hear the owl? Everybody online, can you hear the owl?
We can hear Neil.
It's the
Okay.
direction, the door might need to be closed.
oh, sorry.
That's weird.
Yeah, so what I would say is Colleen, Adrian, I don't have a good answer for you at this point. I think it depends on what this body decides. And then putting this into practice, how it actually plays out. But unfortunately, I don't think I have any better answer at this point.
I could read what the bylaws say about the executive committee. Would that be helpful?
Yeah,
Okay. The executive committee is comprised of 6 officers, the president, who shall serve as the chair, vice president, treasurer, 2 at-large board members, and the immediate past president. The executive committee meets most months during the year to assure the timely conduct of the business of the association, including an annual performance review of the executive director and an annual review of the bylaws of the association. This committee will recommend bylaws changes to the board of directors for action by the membership at the association's annual meeting. The executive committee is empowered to take action on behalf of the full board in all areas except those identified specifically in Article 7. And one of the things that I would note is that the bylaws don't require the board to meet monthly. So if the board wasn't meeting as often, the executive committee would have, would be doing some of the things possibly that the board normally does. So that, I think, answers that question.
yeah. Let me go to Mark next.
So a few things. One, I want to really thank the policy committee, all the members, for the work that we, as a policy committee, put into this. I think we really went in and looked at as many possible scenarios as we could. And one of those was what Colleen was talking about before in regards to timing. Because the executive committee all members of the executive committee are members of the legislative committee, they will already be assembled and able to take an advisory position if a quorum isn't able to be met for the legislative committee. And along the lines of what Adrian just asked, and I apologize, I don't have my notes in front of me, but the policy committee did take a look at, they weren't really agendas, but kind of a summary of topics that the executive committee had gone through over numerous months. And there was a fair amount in there that wasn't directly related to making decisions on advocacy positions. So I think there's still plenty of work there for the executive committee to be part of. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Don, do you still have something?
Yes, I do. And I think Mark may have said it better or more politically correct, but Adrian, as much as I respect you, having served on the executive committee, I'm shocked to think that there are not other things for them to do, because during my tenure there, legislation might have been an issue, but there were a whole lot of other things that we did and we discussed. And as I say, maybe Mark said it better than I can, but I think if you look over what's happened from the executive committee in the last 3 years, you would find there's still a full load with a legislative committee in place.
Well, I guess I will find out. Thank you.
I think you will.
Let me go to Lisa next, and I've got a few hands in the room.
Sure, I just wanted to say I would support this going forward. I think it's easy for us to re-examine it at this time next year. And I do like the concept that hopefully it brings a wider breadth of board members to the table to offer their opinions, suggestions, their values as we're making these significant decisions for the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Let me get Tara.
I just had one quick question. If, which I am supportive of this, but my question is, would you be at least in some sort of report at our board meeting, letting us know what decisions that were made by that committee?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, by practice, we certainly would bring forward so that the full board was aware of what was decided at the legislature.
It's not written, so that's why I thought I would ask.
Yeah. Colleen, you said?
Yeah, I agree that I think it's worth trying. There's enough interest from the VSBA board members in general to give it a try. So it's worth trying. So any of our questions should just be taken. We're just trying to better understand how to work some of the wrinkles out beforehand, before it gets started. So I just have a couple questions, comments. One is the executive committee, as it currently has been constructed and what comes back to the full board. It seems to me that there may be interest in getting more of a summary report at the monthly meetings, like what were the topics, what were the high points, what were the discussion. That might help build some trust between the executive committee and the rest of the full board, because I'm getting a sense that there's a lack of trust with the executive committee. Another suggestion, comment is a consideration for putting a day of the week and a time on the calendar. You know, maybe it's a weekly meeting and you either need to have it or do not need to have it, rather than trying to scramble to pull the legislative committee together at the last minute, so that, you know, maybe it's a fixed time. And then if there's no need for a meeting, then it's canceled. But if there is a need for a meeting, everybody already has it on their calendar, and we're not wasting staff time trying to identify a day and a time. So just two or I guess it's housekeeping concepts.
Thanks, Colleen. I will note that did come up in discussion with the policy committee as to whether or not, and we sort of went back and forth on standing meeting time or just call it when necessary. And the committee landed on the call when necessary idea, but we did discuss both. Any other comments in the room? Yeah.
I think that the clarification to indicate when it's important to basically turn for this board position decision-making to the legislative committee seems like, when it's not clear and the timing doesn't permit it to come before the full board. So I wanted to say that out loud again, because that's clarifying for me and it's helpful for me to think about in the vote. And I think the question then becomes, which I think you all will figure out, is what is that timeliness question? Is it we're asking the legislative committee to make a decision on Monday and the board's meeting Wednesday? Like, I think that is not something you would want to put prescribed, because I think knowing the fluidity of what goes on in a legislative session, I think there needs to be sort of a faith and trust in the decision making, and that is going to feel subjective, but it's going to be so important for people to trust that that's something Sue's going to call on and Neil as as is appropriate based on the timeliness of the matter, and it's not gonna be probably, maybe it isn't, like, maybe that's why it's not a weekly standing meeting, because there may not be action. It's a committee that is empowered to take action. And again, these are more observations because this is new, and I think that you'll work that level of detail out from experience, and people should be sort of generous with one another about how you communicate as it's evolving. And wisdom as I part.
All right, so gang, we've taken a lot of time here. I've got 2 hands online. They're associated with 2 bodies that have spoken quite extensively on this one already, right? So I'm hoping that you've got something new to say. Otherwise, I'm getting really close to seeing, it sounds like the only concerns that folks had from the remainder of the policies here are just the items related to the legislative committee, and that all of the other proposed changes are okay. So I'm getting close to calling the question on this one. So let me go to Don Collins first and then Mark.
I was going to say, Mr. President, I think everything that needs to be said has been said at least once, and I would ask you to call the question.
All right. Mark, I'll let you have a quick chance if you had something you want to jump in with.
I was just going to say, in response to Tara, the policy committee did discuss making sure that it reported back to the whole board, and her question reminded me, I think we wanted that in this policy. Somebody else on the committee may remember otherwise, but the intent definitely was that full report was going to be brought back to the board at every meeting following when the legislative committee met. And on that, I will move that we accept the remainder of the policy as presented, policies as presented.
Second, this is Gaston.
Okay, we got a motion by Mark and we got 2 seconds. We got a second in the room with Nancy and a second up by Captain. You guys are ready to move on to dinner, I can tell. All right, if there's no further discussion, let me stop sharing so that I can see hands. All those in favor, please raise your hand, let me know. I'm seeing.
Aye, from Suzanne.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna say motion passes. It is not unanimous. I see Mark's iPad just sort of has got no mark in it. But we do have sufficient votes. This motion passes. Thank you, board, for the rich discussion on this. And I will just say, so we're gonna pause now for dinner. As we're pausing for dinner, here's something for you to think about. You're gonna need to get together with that regional rep from your region and figure out which one of the 2 of you is gonna sit on this new legislative committee. All right, it's initially up to you guys to figure it out. If you can't figure it out, then I get to come in and tap somebody for it. You might not want that. So, think it through. We are gonna pause for, how long was our dinner break originally?
Half an
scheduled
hour.
for? Half an hour. I'm gonna propose that we shorten it to 15 minutes. And so we will get back together, well, 60 minutes. We'll get back together at 7 o'clock, folks. All right? Thank you. You guys at home, grab a beer, grab a glass of wine.
But Diane, what happened? Something happened.
Yeah, it will be awesome. She and I were on the board together. From us.
All right. Hey gang, hope you got some dinner. If you got the chance, just so that I know that you're back, if you turn the camera back on, then I know we got you. Otherwise, I'm gonna think that you're off playing hooky somewhere and that 1 beer turned into 2 beers. And the next thing you know, you're not coming back to the VSBA meeting, and this whole hybrid model just doesn't work when we take a pause for dinner. All right. So thanks, board. Welcome back. We're going to continue on with the rest of the agenda, and the next item that we've got up is the Vermont Community Foundation Equity Grant Update, and I think I turn it over to Sue for
Yeah.
that.
I will give you a quick update on that. So if you've been reading your weekly VSBA email, we've been highlighting the recipients of the mini grants. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that, so you would take a look at your email and see all of that great information. We've also been highlighting the recipients at the regional meetings. So if you had any recipients in your region, you're going to hear about them at your business meeting, which I think people really appreciate. Just to list them, they were the Burlington School District, Loyola North Supervisory Union, Orange Southwest School District, Rutland City Public Schools, Winooski School District, Addison Central School District, Colchester School District, Hartford School District, Rutland Northeast Supervisory Union, Slate Valley Union School District, Southwest Vermont Supervisory Union, Vermont Student Anti-Racism Network with support from the Essex Westford School District, and the Washington Central Unified Union School District. And as I said in the weekly emails, you can find more details about specifically the project in each of those systems. You'll also hear this at the regional meetings, but wanted to emphasize that as the next phase in our initiative addressing equity and anti-racism, we are going to be doing a second round of mini grants with funding from the Vermont Community Foundation. And it's aimed at supporting school boards in their work toward more equitable, anti-racist and inclusive communities. There's information on our website about the grant criteria, and the grant amount will be $5,000 grants, and the deadline to apply is October 17th. Other information on the Vermont Community Foundation grant is we are continuing to assist VSBA members with ongoing conversations in their communities related to equity and associated topics. We use the services of the Insight Education Group to do that. And if you are experiencing any challenging situations within your board on these topics, you can certainly speak with your superintendent and board chair, and they can contact us and we can get a meeting set up with IED to help you out. Also wanted to let you know that the grant is supporting some customized internal work that the VSBA staff is doing with a consultant to progress each of us on our own path to competency in cultural humility, curiosity, and authenticity. And this is going to include individual and group coaching for the staff beginning in October. And then finally, we are going to be convening a group of participants for some training with the Arizona School Boards Association. That's really geared toward VSBA being able to gain the skill to be able to go out and work with school boards on equity issues, using the Leading for Equity workbook that they have developed. So that is the update on the Vermont Community Foundation grant.
Thank you, Sue. Any board members have any questions related to that work? All right, seeing none, thank you so much. And like as Sue said, if you guys haven't thought about it, you might have a need for it. Certainly talk to your districts. We've got applications open until October 17th. So hope that the money can get out there and be put to good use. Next up is an update on the task force on district governance standards. And I'm going to take a wild guess here, and I think I'm going to turn to Phil. Okay. All right. And Phil said okay. So I think I got it right.
So the task force has met twice, and they have some very engaged and thoughtful members on the task force. Mark Koenig is the chair, and he's been bringing them together and along. They're very much coalescing around these three main, we call them big rocks in the spirit of Stephen Covey. The idea that boards need to be mindful of what their priorities are, to be able to be clear and articulate those priorities among themselves and with the superintendent and to the school community. that the board needs to be mindful of its own practices or protocols. And so they're developing some information around that, some guidance, if you will. And then the third area is board processes. So their process for things like adopting a budget and superintendent evaluation. I can't recall if I don't think we've had a board meeting since the task force met the first time. Secretary French joined us virtually. We were in this room in person. And I know some of the things that are important to him is that the board is including the community in setting a vision and goals, and basically just including the community, including students in their work, in their decisions, in their sense making. The second meeting of the task force involved a national researcher from Montana, Ivan Lawrenson, and he participated for the whole time, listening and sharing ideas and input, plus summaries of his research that were well received. And one of the things the task force is also working on, sort of tangential to this, is a board self-assessment, or what are the key questions the board might ask itself to know that it's performing well on those standards. We've had 2 of our regional meetings in which we got input on the standards. Also, again, some very solid input, ideas and components that may have been missing. So there are pages of documents that people are reviewing. One of the outgrowths, Neil, this is a little bit of scope creep, but people on the committee have been mindful of, well, if we're going to say boards should be doing these things, what are some examples of that? And so we've actually had one task force member begin a repository of artifacts and notes, examples of what goals might look like, an effective superintendent evaluation process. So I know we'll hear a lot more about this in weeks and months to come, because there's some momentum, at least around the task force members, of, really, how do we get this right, and how do we help boards do some of these things the research suggests might actually improve student achievement and help close gaps. They meet again tomorrow evening, and we have 2 different superintendents that will be joining the task force probably for the first 30 to 60 minutes to just share conversations about, in particular, one superintendent, what are some models that they have in their system, and they have a board member on the task force as well, so they'll be sort of sharing in tandem from a superintendent and a board member perspective, and I think that'll be really good.
Thanks, Phil. We're on target?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Let me mention maybe just 3 things process-wise coming up. So there'll be the meeting tomorrow, and then the final meeting is after annual conference. But there'll be a survey that goes to all local school board members, and the design of some of those questions will happen tomorrow. But at annual conference, we'll also have a workshop on the standards and an opportunity for input there too. And then really importantly, as we communicate to others on this, this is not the be all end all. The task force knows that they'll be presenting a recommendation in November to the VSBA board, and then ultimately the state and the secretary with rulemaking process will have lots of opportunity for public input.
Thank you. Any questions for Phil on the progress of the task?
Did I just answer one? Nice.
Any folks online with any questions for Phil? Okay, seeing that, I'm going to admit floor into the.
Thank you.
And I'm not looking.
Popped out, popped back in.
Oh.
Okay. All muted. Okay, moving on then to regional meetings and annual conference update. I'm gonna make a wild guess again and go back to.
I'll do regional meetings and then Phil can do annual. So the regional meetings for Addison, Bennington, Rutland, Central Vermont, and Kingdom North were held last week. And I wanted to thank Suzanne Buck, Lisa Miser, Gaston, and Neil. And did I miss anyone for running those meetings? I think that was it. Oh, David Chandler as well. Sorry, David. David, so those are the people that ran the meetings, and thank you for doing that. The remaining regional meetings are going to be held on September 29th. That will be Kingdom South, Wyndham, and Windsor. And October 6th, Eastern Chittenden, Western Chittenden, and Franklin Grand Isle. And so I just wanted to go over those remaining regions. In Kingdom South, the current information I have is Mark Clough is running for re-election, and there's also another open seat that's been open for over a year. So we're hoping that someone can be found, Mark, to fill that seat. And Neil, I might have to call on you again or somebody to run that meeting because there's 2 elections happening. Wyndham, Mark Schauber is running for re-election, so Dan MacArthur will run the business meeting. Windsor, Amy McCollin is running for re-election. Nancy Russell will run the business meeting. Eastern Chittenden, we have Diane Kirsten Glitman, who is running for the open seat, and Colleen McKinnon will run the business meeting. Western Chittenden, there is an open seat that needs to be filled, I believe. And Martine will run the business meeting. Franklin Grand Isle, John Collins, sounds like is running for the open seat, and so Tara is running the business meeting. And just so you know, if you are running the business meeting, I will send you a script so that you are prepared.
So,
Yes.
just to get back what I'm doing Franklin Grand Isle, I don't know if my working well or not, but I indicated to Carrie that I do plan to be a candidate in Tara for re-election.
Yes. Yep, that's the information we have. Thanks, Don. And then Phil already spoke about what the attendees are learning about at the regional meetings, which is the research and best practices associated with school boards and systems that are improving in student achievement and closing gaps in performance. And they're having the chance to provide some input on the governance, draft governance standards. And I'll hand it over to Phil to give you a little information on the conference.
Yeah, hopefully you can help us promote annual conference. We have Kay Douglas, who's coming as a keynote speaker. Kay was a school board member for 16 years. She's had a very interesting life and journey, very tough lady out of Chicago. And she's also an attorney, but she's been working in school board development, I think, for about 18 to 20 years now. Kind of nationally known among our peers as a board whisperer. But she's tough, make no mistakes on the whisper word. She's very bright and very engaging, and she'll be matter of fact, as you might expect. She'll be doing a keynote, but then also later that morning after a break, she'll be leading a workshop. It'll be essentially a workshop of the whole, but with breakout conversations on key points from the keynote. So Chelsea and I have been working with her on that for some case studies and conversations that people will be able to gravitate to the topic that's really important to them. We're quite fortunate to have Frank Henderson, the current NSBA president, joining us, and he will be addressing the group also on Thursday morning. Looking forward to that. Very much looking forward to the interplay between Kay and Frank, because you'll see their energy. They'll just play off each other more than they know. And so pretty excited too. Just one other thing about conference in particular. Thursday evening, one of our task force members is a very accomplished musician and lives here in Marshfield. He and his wife Diana will be leading some music for us on Thursday evening after dinner. And there'll be some all-comers elements. So if you have musical instruments and you'd like to bring those and play along, there will be opportunities for that. And I think the more people drink, the better the music will be.
That has been our experience. Well, the better it sounds. I don't know that it gets better, but it sounds better.
So I had a vision of Peter Burrows, the VSA president, and Neil, our president, doing some music together. But unfortunately, they both play bass. So I'm not unfortunate. Well, I don't know how that works. Dueling basses will make it hard for Floor to dance. Well, one of the things, and laughter's important, but one of my work targets this next year will be to grow the annual conference. And my expectation, not in 1 year's time, maybe 3, we should be able to have at least half of the school board members in the state come together for an annual conference. So that is a bit of a work target, and Sue and I are talking about ways to engage members in the planning of the annual conference. And also then, in hand with that, the promotion of the event, so that it's really got more of a local board member emphasis. I've been doing this work for a lot of years. I have worked in states where we did it jointly with superintendents associations and without. The fact is superintendents are going to come. They're paid to be there, and they don't want board members off learning stuff that they don't have a chance to help correct. So they'll be there regardless. And I think the onus is really on us to again, kind of shape the content to meet the needs of board members, to make it engaging, memorable, and also a learning experience. So we're going to be working hard on that this next year.
Great. Any musicians out there wanting to join the band? That'll be the first question, right? So make sure that you take one step forward and not one step backward at that request, right? But any questions regarding either the regional meetings or the annual conference? All right, Mark, go ahead.
Can we have the annual conference maybe a little bit further to the south?
You know,
It's
I think that is
a lot of driving for 2 days.
Yeah, I understand. So if your district has got the funds, we certainly would encourage you to spend the night in Lake Maury, so you don't have to do the driving on 2 days. I think you'll find the room rates are fairly reasonable. It's something that we can probably go ahead and take a look at. I mean, the challenging thing, right, is to find a venue that can hold all of us in a location that is somewhat central.
And that's reasonably priced.
And it's reasonably priced as well too, right? So.
Oh, you want
like they
reasonable
always say-
prices?
Well, I think like they always said, like you can have 2 of 3, right? Which 2 do you want to pick? But certainly a decent point, Mark, and we'll do our best going forward to see if there's anything we can do there.
Okay, can I ask another question, which I was going to ask separately, but I'll ask it to the whole. Are dogs allowed? Which would make spending the night a whole lot easier.
You can call the hotel and ask them.
Okay. I'll do
Call
that.
Lake Maury. I wouldn't be surprised because it's Lake Maury, but you can give them a call.
Thank you.
Along the lines of the location, the last time there was an annual conference, it was after mergers and the numbers were way down. I just wonder if it's a different set of numbers that we're looking at for the future going forward, that there might be more options out there.
Oh, we look every year. I mean, it's always evaluated.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it was like last time we met, it was like half the numbers or something. It was really
Half as
way
many
down.
school board members statewide. Is that what you mean?
The number of people who showed up at that.
Oh, during COVID.
No, before COVID, after merger.
We've been,
After all the
yeah,
mergers,
we've been at
for some
99 to 100 board members for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just felt different.
Sure. Don, go ahead.
Yes, to Mark Schwarber. Mark, at one point in my career, I worked down in your area, and I think I would encourage you to go up to Mount Snow and see if they'd give a deep discount since we're between foliage and ski season. They might be just glad to have people in their rooms.
They may, but that's bringing everybody down to the south.
Once in a while would hurt.
I don't have any problem with it, but if I don't want to travel up to Lake Maury, it's hard to ask people to travel all the way down here.
Only one time, once every 10 years.
Okay, what I would say though is for folks, like, please try to take the time and make an effort to attend in person. If it's only for that Thursday, for 2 reasons. One is I think you get great benefit from being at the conference in person. One of the things that I find extremely useful is just being able to talk to other board members, to have that vehicle, to have those conversations, even if you don't go to any of the breakout sessions, which I'm sure are going to be fantastic. But secondly, also, is it issue in Lake Maury for the annual business meeting? And I don't want to, I can't stress enough how important it is to the VSBA, right, that we have well thought out, discussed and decided on resolutions every year, because that's the primary vehicle for determining what our position is going to be, whether it is regards to legislative advocacy or other initiatives for school board members in the state. Like, it's a really important aspect of this organization, and having decent attendance at that meeting is of prime importance to the VSBA. So I just want to add that in there. I will also add that if you're there in person and if you, I will cover the first beer. At the bar.
Did we end on time, that means?
It means that we're all having Coors Light. No, just joking with you. But yeah, a little sweetener there. If you're able to make it in person, I would be happy to cover your first drink after the business meeting, not before the business meeting. All right. With that, we're going to move on to NSBA Leadership Conference Report. So I will apologize ahead of time. I really should have put a little thought and effort into this report out, but perhaps Flora is going to pick up the slack for me. What I would say is that, so we had a chance to go out to the Leadership Conference in San Antonio at the beginning of August, almost middle of August. A, it was ridiculously hot. B, it was really, really hot. But C, it was a great opportunity, as I said, to get together with board members from across the country. But also a great opportunity as the NSBA, you know, as folks are familiar with the situation, the fallout related to the letter to the Biden administration, the current state of affairs with NSBA. It was a great opportunity to get folks together to figure out, so where do we go from here? What are the important things about this organization? What are the things that we want to focus on moving forward? And collectively, what are our goals and desires for the organization? So there was a lot of collaboration that went on at the conference. I will point out, led in large part by our very own Phil Gore, who helped us helped NSBA through this, through that weekend, that long weekend of work. And a lot of positive stuff that came out of that. And I'll maybe pause there and see if Flora had anything else that she wanted to add about the experience.
Yeah, well, can you hear me okay if I talk this way? So the speakers, can I speak to two of them? So the first speaker, and I'll put it right here in my notes, John Registry, if I'm saying that correctly. I just want to share two of the things that he shared that I actually used them on my welcome to the in-service for my school board, and I'm just going to read it to you. It's very short, but it was really inspired by what we learned in this. So welcome to the start of 2022-2023 school year. We are committed to bringing, as a board, committed to bringing oxygen into the system and continue to collaborate with all of you in what are the nuggets that we need to learn for our kids, not for ourselves. Your dedication over the years. So basically what he talked about was about, you know, like how we come to an environment and the oxygen that we bring and not taking oxygen out. And I think as board members, that really resonated with me because we set the tone for our district. So I wanted to share that about him. And then the other speaker was really good too, Jeff Henderson. It talked about, you know, what are we for? And it's a lot of conversations that we've been having about our mission and our vision. So I'm not going to elaborate on that. The other thing that I'll share is that I did interview, I didn't get selected, so I did let you down there, but I did get appointed to the NSBA, to the Leaves and Resolutions Committee in DC, and that was unanimous from the Northeast. And I think that's in January in DC. So we did, I think the conversation was a little different, at least for me, than the last time that I was in one of the, I felt the absence of the other board members. It was easy in some ways. The conversations were easier. There were some maybe little comments, but, you know, the urgency to bring those other, at least for me, the urgency of bringing the other states back is, it's important to have an honest conversation. So that, I think it was completely worth our time for all of us. We had, you know, there were meetings all day, but we, you know, it was fun. And we were right on the Riverwalk, and so it was nice. So thank you.
Yeah, I will just add to that, you know, I do think as Flor noted, I mean, it's a smaller organization currently. You know, I think the goal is to try to, you know, regain as many of the members as possible, but you know, there's a different aspect, at least from my perspective with a small organization. The folks that remained, I think they're mostly like-minded, right? And as Flor noted, that does make the conversation seem less contentious. The points of view seem more similar. You know, and that's good and bad in a way, right? Because I think that you do benefit from having some different opinions at the table. But it's also refreshing to be able to accomplish something at the same time, right? So it's this push-pull, you know, the good and the bad with it. But I think that I think the organization is committed to doing the best that it can moving forward to regain members so that we are truly the national organization, the National School Boards Association, representative of school boards all across the country, even in Canada, and moving forward that way. I will also add, because Flor brought it up, Flor did put her name forward for a Northeast Region Director position. I was involved in the nominating committee and sessions. Flor did an amazing job in the interview process. Don't let her comments convince you otherwise. She did not let anyone down. She did a fantastic job. I think the organization, all of the candidates were great. I'm biased. I thought Flor was the best. There were also other people on the committee that came to me afterwards and said, I voted for Flor. So that was great. She just came up, you know, 1 or 2 votes short. This is not the end of the story. And I think the good news about this, right, is now we know what the process is like. Right? And I think part of the awkwardness, part of the struggle was sort of being surprised at maybe some of the questions that came up, being surprised at the format of the interview, being surprised at the people that were at the table. Now Flor knows all of that stuff, right? And so the second time around, I think that we might end up with a very different outcome. So Flor represented us very well, and we should all be very proud of her for putting herself out there, even though she didn't get the final nod. She did wonderfully. So. Any other questions or comments, or like Colleen?
I just want to follow up with, you said you were appointed to a committee, beliefs and resolutions.
Yeah, so that is the work that happens in January, and we are excited because it's when you actually get to meet, and especially now that we would have a representation of the state of Vermont, you actually get to really talk. I've never participated, so I don't have all of the, but it is the part that I think they're most interested in. How can we affect actual policy?
Well, congratulations. I mean, that seems like a very important role because that's what could drive mission and decision-making going forward. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Oh, and I will just, to pick up on one thing that Phil noted. So we extended, so after having conversations with Frank Henderson, who is the current president of the NSBA board, I extended an invitation to Frank to come visit us in Vermont. And he was, at least at the conference, he seemed like he was interested in doing that. But I actually followed up with him after the conference to find out if that was real or if he was just being polite to me as we were having drinks. And Frank took us up on the offer. So he will be joining us, coinciding with the conference up in Lake Maury. So I expect him to roll in sometime on Wednesday evening. Will be with us for Thursday and Friday and then depart on Saturday. So very excited that he's able to join us. And I think it also represents a sort of a shift in VSBA and a little bit greater participation in the national level effort that maybe we have exhibited in the past when it comes to NSBA. So good news. We'll make sure that y'all get a chance to meet Frank. We'll introduce you. Have a great conversation, but super nice guy. Definitely committed board member. So we look forward to it. Don, I see your hand up again. You're a popular speaker, Don.
That's all right. So Neil, besides the pandemic and everything that we had, what issues have driven the problem with attendance, participation, membership with NSBA?
The biggest one was one that I thought that we had talked about in a recent board meeting, Don, and that was a letter that was drafted by NSBA that was sent to the Biden administration, referencing needed support for school boards in very contentious times. I think if you guys are unfamiliar with the situation, I might want to add it as a future agenda item because I really think it needs more than just a 2-minute description.
And I remember the letter and I remember a conversation, but I never followed up. I never heard a lot. And then when you mentioned it tonight, it was like, maybe the future agenda, we should spend a little time on it.
Yeah, happy to do that. I think the short version, even though I said I wasn't going to do a short version, the short version is that there is another organization that is formed, the Consortium of State School Board Associations. It has collected 20 some odd members already, and they are just getting off the ground. So you essentially now have at least 2 associations ostensibly representing, almost half of the country within each organization.
Sounds like golf where the PGA is challenged. Nothing's sacred anymore.
Yeah. So, but we can certainly, if folks would like a little bit deeper dive on that stuff, we can schedule that for a future meeting.
Thank you, Neil.
Any other comments or questions? All right. Moving on then to the September 20th webinar for the board. And maybe I want to turn it over to Sue for just a.
Sure, I have a couple of brief
Yep.
bits of information I can give. I sent an email about the webinar a couple of weeks ago, and then another email yesterday, providing you with the date and time. It's on September 20th from 4 to 6 p.m. And I'll be sending you an email later this week that will have the link to the webinar. It's being held for the boards of the VSBA, the VSA, the VPA, and the Vermont NEA. It's to provide you with information that's going to be important for you to understand as the legislature grapples with how to address the impacts in Vermont of the Supreme Court decision of Carson v. Macon. And it's not going to be recorded. As I said, it's going to be from 4 to 6 on the 20th. And we're hoping that as many of you as will be able to attend. Anything else from you on that? Neil?
I'm gonna say, folks, make the time in your calendars to come to this webinar. This is gonna be the big issue that our organization and other organizations are gonna be grappling with, I think, for the next couple of years. And I think that this session is going to be extremely valuable to board members. This is considered educational. It's to give you the background as to how we got where we are right now and the implications of some of the recent decisions that have been made both in the Supreme Court, but also within Vermont. There's a couple of other legal cases going on right now, and Sue's email yesterday was a reflection on some recent developments in one of those cases. So the information, the session is not going to be recorded. That is on purpose. All of the organizations that are sponsoring this and working collaboratively together on it wanted to make sure that we were able to have a frank conversation about some of the issues, but at the same time, because there's going to be some discussion, I think, about possible legislative strategy. We didn't want any of that stuff recorded that might tip our hands to any folks that might then tune in later or find some of that information valuable. So I highly encourage you to make the time in your calendar to come to this session. It is just for the VSBA board. and the boards of these other organizations. It is not something that we are delivering to full membership at this point. So it's just for you folks, all right?
And we have national experts. I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, so sorry, you'll have folks from the National Education Law Center, Vermont ACLU, Vermont NEA, legal authorities, and also NSBA, legal assistance. So we've got folks on this webinar that know their stuff and can help answer questions that board members may have and give us some of the background on this. So Don, is your hand up from before, or you got another comment?
I'm fine, Neil.
Okay, thanks. I'll probably just lower that hand. Any questions regarding that? Okay. Seeing none, then moving on to the VSBA Strategic Plan Monitoring Report, which is in your packet.
Yes, that is in your packet, and we've actually, because of the items that we had on the agenda, we've covered many of the highlights, I think, already, such as the Governance Standards Task Force and the regional meetings and the conference. A couple of things that we haven't talked about that I think are notable are we do have a new required model policy addressing non-discriminatory school branding. And that is on our website. And there also are some newly updated model policies that just came out yesterday. Students who are homeless is one of them. And the other one is non-discrimination, I believe. Phil has been extremely busy helping boards with board development. And so he's been getting a lot of miles in and a lot of time and getting to know a lot of Vermont school boards. It's very exciting that they're calling upon him to help them in their development. The other thing that I wanted to let you know about is, and I attached the letter in the packet, that the employer commissioners submitted input to the Green Mountain Care Board on the University of Vermont Medical Center's proposed 20% increase to its current rate structure. And you can see the message that they crafted with help of their communications consultant. And that was submitted in mid-August. And since then, we know that the Green Mountain Care Board must have been listening to some of the comments, because they did not provide the full 20% increase. I believe it was closer to 14% is the amount that they provided, which is still a very significant, going to be a very significant increase for VHI to deal with. I think that covers it, because the other thing I had in here was the information on that you and Flora already provided on the leadership seminar. So yeah, I think those are the highlights. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Anybody have any questions about the strategic plan monitoring report? If that was the only thing that board members did not read when you got the packet, if you were focused on all the other stuff, please go ahead and read the monitoring report, right? In part because I mentioned this because one of the things that I heard from a few board members at our strategic planning meeting was feeling a little bit of a disconnect of not knowing exactly what might be going on within the VSBA. So the work of the executive director and some of the other directors of the organization. And that monitoring report is a great way to feel a little bit more connected with the day-to-day operation of the organization and to get a better feel of what's going on. So I really do encourage you to read it. Even if we don't really cover it in depth at a meeting, it's a great source of information for board members. With that, I am going to move on to the consent agenda, and with that included is the August minutes. I will look for a motion to approve the consent agenda. Tara is already on top of it with a motion, and Kim Gleason has seconded that motion. Any discussion related to the consent agenda? Seeing none, then I will look for a vote. All those in favor of the consent agenda, please Raise your hand. That looks to be unanimous. Thank you, board. Any new business?
Bill, you do the
Yeah.
awards?
Yeah, I want to mention, last night, the awards committee met
Oh.
and reviewed 2 nominations for the Exceptional Board Leadership Award. Those that were present were Martine Gulick, Mark Schauber, Adrian Raymond, and Amy McMullen, and Carrie and I. Amy recused herself from the meeting when we discussed this award, as she was the chair of one of the boards that was nominated. The committee expressed appreciation for each nomination and noted that any board functioning well during the past year was worthy of commendation due to all the recent challenges that boards and school systems face. The Windsor Central Supervisory Union Board rose to the top for the breadth of support that they had from their community members for their nomination. Committee members recognized that as a worthy accomplishment and acknowledged how difficult it can be during times of community divisiveness. They also noted how important community support is for the success of any school system. And the letters of recommendation that they received highlighted the value of the board's responsiveness to challenges, demonstration of leadership within the school community. And their letters of support illustrated that the board has been supportive of staff and provides visionary leadership for the whole system.
Thank you very much for that work and good job, Amy.
The one thing I might just note, there were a few names submitted for Stafford Bell Award, and we're doing some more research on those, and Sue may want to weigh in on that at some point, how that selection process might go. The awards committee was willing to meet again and have the conversation if we want to do that before conference.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other items of new business? Colleen, go ahead.
Do we have an opportunity for feedback on the hybrid meeting? I mean, I personally felt connected to the group online, but I wonder if we have an opportunity to get feedback on how it went for everybody, and if anyone had suggestions.
We can certainly do that because according to the agenda, I have to continue this until 8 o'clock tonight. For the next 15 minutes, we can just gather feedback on how the hybrid model works for folks. So why don't somebody chime in? I think Jim just clapping. Dan took the up on the offer. Dan, go ahead.
I'd say it worked very, very well. And thank you, Neil, for being attentive to those little hands going up. I think it worked well. Thank you.
Amy, go ahead.
I also think it worked really well. I would not have been able to attend the meeting otherwise this month, so thank you.
Thanks. Folks in the room, you guys feeling comfortable with this model?
Yeah.
It means more dinner for us here, and you guys, you know,
More than 15.
you guys just go ahead and stay home. We'll still get the same amount of food. And it should work out pretty well.
We're supposed to encourage him to come so that we can have
Oh,
a caterer.
That's what I was gonna say, you're gonna have to
Expecting us to just tell me
I
nothing.
really, yeah, no, I think, I am a little disappointed. Sometimes the hybrid model could not work that great, so I am kind of happy that folks in general felt tonight was okay. But what I would say is, that, I know that it's a slog for some of you folks, and it's even worse in the winter time. But if you can make it up to Prospect, once a quarter or something like that, it's really nice. I mean, I enjoy seeing all the faces that I see at the table tonight, and it's just really nice to do that. And yeah, I encourage it.
Do you want to talk about the November meeting?
Ooh, yeah, come in person.
9.
Come in person for the November meeting, and here's the reason why I'm going to encourage that is that, so there's 2 reasons, actually. The November meeting, we'll be seating our potential new board members. So the results of the regional meetings where folks got elected. And secondly, it's because when we do officer elections, aside from the president's seat, And I find it hugely beneficial for folks to be in the same room together so that we can have conversations, people get to meet one another rather than doing it through Zoom, especially if you're feeling a little less connected at this moment in time, or if you're a brand new board member and haven't met other folks. I really encourage folks to try to make an effort to be at 2 Prospect for the November meeting for those 2 reasons.
And we only budgeted for, I think, 4 in-person meetings, so we won't be having another in-person meeting after November, probably for at least a couple of months
Yeah.
during the winter.
And it will probably be turkey with stuffing, cranberry sauce, all of that stuff.
Great expectations there.
Adrian, go ahead.
Oh, I was still answering the question of how did this work? I think it works really well, but I do question whether when we have new people, whether they will feel it works as well if they have not come in contact with people in person. So I think the idea of getting people to come to the November meeting is really important. Because it does help to get that cohesive feeling.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This is moving on to the next thing. In fact, moving way back to the beginning, I just want to bring up something that Martine brought up earlier on about how our money is expended or where it's saved. And she mentioned, just looking at the funds. And so, Jim, I would encourage you and the finance committee to look at ESGs, whatever you can. I mean, even the big guys all have them, but that seemed like a really important thing to me. Just the talk about the National School Boards Association and us, where our money resides, that would make me feel better. So I just want to throw that out. Thanks. Sorry for jumping way back to the beginning.
All right, I knew I should have ended before 8 o'clock. Any other comments tonight? Oh, yes, sorry, thank you. So should remind me, we have a few folks for which this is likely the last meeting, unless we get to see you at the annual meeting. I would highly encourage
I'm not sure how I could catch that, but.
so I will first go to Kim Gleason. Thank you so much for all of your service over the multiple years that you've been a part of this organization. I wish we could have hold on to you longer. Maybe you don't wish that. But you've been invaluable to the organization throughout all of your numerous roles. And I just want to say thanks.
Absolutely, my pleasure, my honor, and probably the most functional board I've served on, and all the boards I've served on. So I really think I learned so much with it. And carry it with all the other pieces that I work to make as functional.
And we don't lose you. We're just you're still a representative, our representative with the state board.
Yeah.
So that work continues.
Yeah, definitely.
So we will still be in touch. I believe our other Dave Sharp is our other.
Yes.
Yeah.
And is Dave?
He's
it looks
here, I
like-
think.
Is he still with us or did he drop off? I think he might have.
He had
dropped
said he
off.
was leaving.
He said he had to leave.
Dang it, didn't get him before bedtime, so. But yeah, I will certainly extend our thanks to the work that Dave has done as well too. As a board member, who, a guy who's definitely been involved in education for a very long time. Preceding his work with the legislature. So certainly are very appreciative of that voice and what he's contributed to the organization. Am I good now? Is there anything
I
else
think
I'm
so. I don't
forgetting?
think there's anyone else.
God, if I'm screwing up and one of you guys is leaving, raise your hand and let me know, so I
Means
can.
you can't leave and you have to come
Yeah.
back.
Sorry, if you're not acknowledged, you must come back.
I mean, Don tried, but.
I know.
I guess we could ask Bart how has it been for him, because he's new, he's not playing it. How did the, are you coming in November? How's it work for you as the new board member? Not to put you in the spot, Bart, but.
Sorry, I had a bit of a hard time hearing.
Oh, sorry, I keep not talking to that. I just wonder how did it go for you? Because you're a new board member and you had just joined us remotely and just interested in how this.
Yeah, no, I think it worked really well. I'm on video conferences probably for most of the day with people throughout the country. And this is actually my first experience using the OWL. So I've been impressed. So it seemed to work well.
Thank you. Martine, go ahead.
A few things. First off, I came on in COVID, so I haven't met any of you except maybe, I think I met Kim Gleason at Essex High School a few years back, but otherwise, so I will try to make it in November. My second question is, if I am lucky enough to get elected to the state senate in November, can I remain on this board through the duration of my school board term?
You're our plan.
Yes, in fact, I would expect nothing less.
Okay, just making sure it's all on the up and up.
It's good to have friends in high places.
Good luck.
That's
All right. Anybody else? We're just 6 minutes away from my 8 o'clock target. I'm okay if we want to go 6 minutes early. All right. How about a motion to adjourn?
Just a move. Yeah, I'll second.
Moved by Kim, seconded by Tara. All those in favor? Thank you so much, board. Have a good night.
Bye, thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Our students coming in the schools.
Shasta Valley.
Yeah, and do they come through what? Through Rotary or do they come through? Kids that support people who go to school?
I don't know, we've had a couple of families that have just been running it forever.
No, I believe it's like some organization that.
That's essentially the national, and everything has to go through them, no matter where it's.
Our word with.
Because Rotary is so active.
So I just find that,
Yeah.
that may also be, and,
We, yeah, right.